Well, yeah, I got this from this Julia woman again, space elf woman, and she's saying that she sent me this email about graphene, and it's
Oh yes, yeah. I just posted a whole heap of information about the graphene oxide that's in all the masks and all the vaccines, and it's in a whole heap of everything. And this is what's giving everyone COVID symptoms.
I think so, but not in the way that's in this email. Nobody's sort of put this together in quite the same way as myself. I mean, I don't know if you remember, I have a special relationship with graphene. Do you remember I told you the story about Croto?
Yeah, go on.
Well, I was in Sir Harry Croto's last lecture in 2004. And this was when I was just starting out in September 2004 at Sussex University. And it was his last lecture, so it was like in the big amphitheater, packed out with students everywhere. And he sort of gave a rundown of his career. So there was a section about looking at proteins as if they were molecular machines. And I've actually seen some work about that recently. In terms of looking at certain proteins, in particular enzymes, I think is molecular motors and things like this, which is linked to both nanotech and, of course, biotech, and the interface between nanotech in terms of nanobots and biotech. So even back then, they were all already beginning to sort of integrate the two approaches. And then he talked about borides. And he actually said the work that he was most proud of at Sussex was the work on borides, because he's just said basically the textbooks say that you can't do this. And this was how he was making kind of organic type molecules, but with boron instead of carbon.
So he was mixing polymers back then to make the nanotechs.
No, they weren't polymers. They weren't actually polymers.
Right.
They were sort of they were small organics, but with boron instead of carbon. He was very proud. He said he was actually proud of that than the carbon 60 stuff, because he said this is completely contrary to the textbooks. Then and the third, sorry.
They used the carbon 60 buckyball stuff for a lot of their sinister sort of stuff, and that's what Michelle was basically saying. Remember years ago, and also she was saying how they were using boron in some sort of way to basically develop their sort of nanotech infrastructure sort of system as well.
Well, this was the thing. This was why I was at the lecture, because Sir Harry Croto, and he got the Nobel Prize or something, or became a Sir because of this work on carbon 60 and carbon 70. And the reason that it was his last lecture was because he was just about to fuck off to the US, because he'd been given an opportunity to have a lot more funding over there. Actually, after he left, the Department of Biochemistry in Sussex University and the Department of Chemistry just both went down the chute completely. So he was obviously getting out, as the university was completely fucking up the departments and the funding and everything. And he'd been offered, probably to work for someone like DARPA or something connected to DARPA. It was all pretty obvious.
Well, DARPA basically pioneers all the nanotech regarding the hydrogel and all the rest of it. Yeah. And basically, Dragon filled me in on all that stuff because he literally grew up as a child through DARPA, and they used to basically train him. Yeah.
Yeah, so we know all about it. Yeah, I mean, it was obvious to me that something pretty sort of top level was absorbing Croto from the UK to get his work, and this was only back in 2004, and so when he gave the lecture, he actually went over his work in terms of describing the discovery of carbon 60, the buckyball, Buckminster fullerene, And then the discovery of carbon-70, which is like has an extra section in the middle, so it becomes like a sort of oval or an egg. And then from that principle, then of course he realized that you can extend it into a tube. And then he said, demonstrating his own lack of understanding of electricity, he said, well, imagine if we've got this nano tube, and he didn't use the word graphene because the word graphene for this molecule hadn't yet been coined back then.
Right.
He just said it's a tube of the carbon-70 made into a tube. And he said what we could do is we could put a line of iron atoms down the middle. I mean, completely demonstrating his ignorance. And then we'd have a nano wire. And then he said something like, now, if you imagine if we could put these in a 3D mesh, and then he said, imagine the computing power we would have. And this was sort of like the culmination, the climax of his lecture. And he got a standing ovation. The entire amphitheater of all these students in this massive lecture hall was going absolutely insane and clapping without pause. And I was the only one sitting there looking completely terrified because I could see what they were up to, you know, and I was just thinking, you know, that's the Terminator's brain.
Yeah.
I was just like, I was desperately looking around. I was desperately looking around at these other students to see if anybody else had kind of got the picture, and nobody had. You know, nobody else saw the implications, and they were all clapping him like crazy. And I was thinking, bloody hell, you know this.
What I find interesting from what you just explained, James, between the carbon-60 being more of a ball and carbon-70 being more of a seed or an egg-like shape, is that what you were basically saying there?
Of course, yeah. I mean, if you imagine carbon-60 is a football. It's just it's essentially, you know, if you know the classical football with black pentagons and white hexagons. That's
so you're talking about a football as in like a soccer ball.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now this is very significant what you've just pointed out, actually, because when you look at the head of a human being, okay, is it more the shape of a soccer ball or a rugby ball, or I should rather say an egg or a seed shape?
Well, actually, that depends on the genetics of the individual.
That's right. And notice how some heads are more round like a ball and some heads are more elongated like a seed or an egg shape. Interesting, huh? Yeah,
that's very true. So when he had this egg shape, now this is called carbon-70, and that was the beginning because it had an extra ring of 10 atoms around the equator, and so that pushed it out into that egg shape or dolichocephalic shape with it as a cranial analogy. And then he realized from then, well, I mean, if you just keep adding rings of 10 atoms, you're going to end up with a tube. And that was how graphene was born. And of course, he was wrong in terms of what he said about placing a line of iron atoms down the middle in his mind to create electrical conduction. I mean, obviously, he didn't know what the hell he was talking about because, I mean, first of all, iron is a magnetic atom, or magnetic crystal, rather than or atom as well. Whereas for electrical conduction, you want a diamagnetic elements such as aluminium or gold, copper, calcium, silver. Silver is the most conductive element in the universe. But so what it actually turned out in the end is that graphene, graphite obviously is of itself an electrical conductor, and a good one. So what happened with the graphene is it turned out that the graphene didn't need any kind of metal atom in it at all, to be a conductor. And in fact, it ended up being one of the best conductors of electricity in the world. And it knocked calcium off position number 5. So metallic calcium was the 5th best conductor in the world. And then when graphene came along, it became number 6. So that's quite high up, because all of the top 4 are actually used in industry as electrical conductors. Aluminium, gold, copper, and silver is the top one. Yeah. So graphene is up there. It's right up there as an electrical conductor. And so what I worked out 1 year ago now, a year ago, is I got a theory together about how the 60 gigahertz worked in terms of oscillating oxygen. And what I realized is that you needed a nano conductor in the bloodstream so that you could couple the frequency 60 gigahertz, which is the absorption frequency of oxygen.
Yeah, look, I just see it right now, and through the 5G sort of system, they can basically zap people much easier with the graphene in the body, because it's got a magnetic alloy in it as well. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it's not magnetic, it's diamagnetic. Diamagnetic means is the same concept as an electrical conductor.
Well, it seems that this graphene is also causing this magnetism, perhaps in people's bodies. Like
I don't see that. I don't see that. I mean, maybe it is, but a diamagnet would repel magnets, so that doesn't explain the magnets. I mean, that's one of the things which is in this email that I've just got about the graphene. And they've confirmed all of the vaccines contain this graphene.
Yes.
So, but I don't see it as being I don't see it as being magnetic.
Well,
so that must be something else.
What it does is the graphene basically it creates all the flu-like COVID sort of symptoms, and it really makes a meal deal of the body. In a massive sort of way.
Yeah, but what they're not talking about is how it could, as a so-called conductor, it could carry the 60 gigahertz signal into the interior of the lung, and then oscillate oxygen inside of the lung and prevent the formation of oxyhemoglobin. And that's the exact symptomology that we're seeing.
Well, that's what I was trying to basically get to, but I just didn't have the language. But you're sort of saying it, yeah.
Yeah. So I think I fucked up. I fucked up because 1 year ago I had this all worked out, but I was behind the times on the conductor, and so I was looking for aluminium because I thought, okay, well, they're going to do they need an electrical conductor. Is actually an etheric obstructor to carry, because you see the 60 gigahertz 5G signal, it can't even go through a leaf. That's why they've had to cut all these trees down. You see?
Yep.
But if my theory is that if there is a conductor in the blood, then if the 60 hertz is on the skin, then it's going to get carried. The signal is going to get conducted, literally just like an electric circuit, through the bloodstream and the lymph stream into the heart and into the lungs. And there in the lungs, it can disrupt oxyhemoglobin formation, because if the oxygen is flipping 60 billion times a second, because it's coupled to its absorption spectrum band field. And this is again another area that most people won't get. I mean, I get it because
you must be on the mark. You're breaking up a bit then, so you must be on the mark. Keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the how to explain. I mean, I can work this out because I've just done a decade on the effects of electrical fields on gas atoms and other atoms, so molecules rather. So I know exactly what happens. I mean, under field influence, what happens is diatomic oxygen forms a dipole. You see, this is another thing that I've not seen anybody apart from me talking about this. There's lots of information out there, lots of half stories. But nobody's put this information out there. You know that under the influence of the alternating electric field, the diatomic oxygen forms a dipole, and a dipole is the same as water. Water is a dipole. That's why it's the universal solvent, and that's how microwave oven works. Is that so it's the same as the microwave, but yet it isn't, in that it doesn't generate heat, because you see when this effect happens with the water dipole at the absorption spectrum frequency band of water, which is 2.45 gigahertz lower, then the water flips, but because it's in a liquid or in a solution, in terms of a piece of food or a liquid that's being heated, then because the molecules are touching, they generate heat. And so you see, there's all this confusion out there, and people are saying, oh, it can't affect oxygen like a microwave, because obviously the air isn't getting heated. But I mean, obviously it doesn't get heated because the molecules in a gas are not touching each other. So when this oscillation is induced in a gas, like oxygen gas, which forms 20% of the air, or it used to be 20%.
Oh, they're heating up water in the oxygen to actually fry it, or something like that.
No, that's the opposite of what I'm saying. The water heats up because the molecules of water are touching each other, because the water is liquid. You see?
Yes.
So all of the molecules are touching. But if you induce this effect in the gas, same method. You couple the molecule, which is a dipole, and most people don't even think of diatomic oxygen as a dipole, because it's not a dipole when it's not under magnetic field influence, EMF influence. But once it is under EMF influence, then it becomes a dipole due to the influence of the magnetic field causing a unequal distribution of electrons, which then gets polarized and becomes a dipole. In other words, a molecular magnet, the same as water and hydrogen sulfide.
Mm-hmm.
So there is this confusion out there saying, well, it's not heating the oxygen, so this theory must be wrong. Any of this sort of approximations of this theory that are out there must be wrong, because the oxygen gas isn't heating up. But it's a gas, so the molecules aren't touching, so there's no friction. So they can oscillate all they like and no heat will be produced, but that doesn't mean the oscillation is not occurring. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, but what does occur, if the signal is carried inside the lung through a conduction circuit caused by the presence of what I theorized would be nanoaluminium in the blood, then you induce the oscillation of oxygen at its absorption spectrum frequency band 60 billion cycles a second, 60 gigahertz. And what that means is that oxyhemoglobin doesn't form, which is the compound of the hemoglobin with the oxygen molecule. So if that doesn't form, then essentially the blood is not oxygenated, and that causes all the symptoms that we've been seeing for the last year. Everything.
Okay. So now I can basically simply sort of say, from what you've just allayed, is that basically, yeah, the microwaves can't fuck with the oxygen molecule at 60 hertz unless they got some sort of aluminium or graphene sort of nano running through the system in the blood.
Yeah, exactly. Because they can in the air, in the free air. If I put a 60 gigahertz signal in the free air, the oxygen would oscillate in it. but it wouldn't necessarily oscillate in the interior of the alveoli and the bronchial tubes in the lung. But if the blood contained nanoaluminium or nano copper or nano gold or nano silver
or nano graphene, and look, I can see
yeah, exactly.
They've deliberately gone for the nasty shit like aluminium, because aluminium does conduct, but aluminium's toxic to our systems, and the same with the graphene.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just messed up on the material. I was behind the times, and you know, it's just another one of those things. If I hadn't had such a stressful year, so many people letting me down, you know, and this whole thing with Cool Earth, the worst environmental charity in the whole world, like complete waste of time and money. Never donate anything to Cool Earth. Never work with Cool Earth. Really, they're a front for Rothschild. They're a front for the biggest genociders of tribal people in the history of the world, masquerading as their saviors in the Amazon. And just really let me down and just really wasted a lot of people's time. No, there's absolutely false.
So I can basically see that, yeah, you would have cottoned onto this much earlier if you weren't overloaded with all this other shit. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, because I already knew this about the graphene, but for some reason, and because I had all of this worked out 1 year ago, more than a year ago now. I had everything worked out because I was just like, you know, I could see that it's the pervarchy playing their usual games, but this, well, I mean, in a sense, not a usual game, because this is almost like the end game. But it is the end game, or they're trying to make it the end game.
Yeah,
you know. So I was like, I'm really going to make an effort. I'm going to work all of this out, and I'm going to absolutely nail the issues, and then I'm going to do a publicity, and I'm going to go through everything, and then we're going to stop all of this. More than a year ago, I was ready to do that, but I made a mistake. The mistake was nanoaluminium. And then when the vaccines came out, the first one that I saw did have a lot of nanoaluminium in it. So I was thinking, right, I'm on the right lines. And maybe I was. Maybe the nanoaluminium was the conductor in that one, because there's several of these vaccines made by different companies, right? So
they've also got formaldehyde and a whole heap of other shit going on in there as well.
Yeah,
also, I might make mention of the fact that we're constantly being littered with aluminium nano through the chemtrails.
Absolutely, and also they were one of the reasons that I thought it as well is because nanoaluminium was in previous vaccines too, you see.
Yes.
So I was thinking, this, and one of the other things that I was considering was that perhaps the people who were getting COVID from the beginning, maybe they were under 60 gigahertz influence, either through a satellite or through a local antenna.
Yep.
And for some reason, they already had enough nanoaluminium in the blood to from previous vaccines or from chemtrails or from things that people have put in food,
or like the parabens from deodorants and things like that.
All that kind of stuff. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Do you know what that means, parabens?
No, I don't actually.
Well, parabens means congratulations. Yeah, it's kind of a dark. It's a black humor thing.
So they've literally inverted something yet again. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're saying congratulations, you've got cancer.
Yeah.
Because the women spray it under their arms and then through the lymph duct, you get the aluminium oxide or whatever it is, or whatever chemical it is, it goes into the breast. So that's why it's called parabens. And of course, it's Portuguese, and as we know, Mengele was down in Brazil, so it's all pretty self-explanatory in terms of how that came about. But yeah, I mean, I had this theory all worked out more than a year ago, and I was ready to go public. And then the vaccine, and then I was, wasted my time by this, arrogant, idiotic, time-wasting Rothschild, Windsor, fake indigenous, fake rainforest company, Cool Earth, and I didn't have time to really knuckle down. And then the vaccine started coming out, and I started to realize, well, one of them has nano-aluminium, and none of the others have aluminium. That was what I was told, and so I started to think, damn, I'm wrong. I've got it wrong somehow. So
well, it seems like the whole vaccine thing, they've got a strategized sort of plan as for targeting certain race genetic types. If you watch that series called Utopia back from 2013, it's literally all in there.
Okay.
Yeah. It literally tells you their whole fucking methodology of their sort of biological weapon targeting, so to speak.
Yeah, because there's a genetic element as well. So
yes,
the whole situation is what we used to call in our university days a clusterfuck.
Yes.
It's a multifactorial end game which is designed to be too complicated for anybody to work out all of the elements at any one time, and so they believe that this will guarantee the success of their program by taking everybody down. I had always hoped to, find a way around that, perhaps by diagnosing all of the different elements. But yeah, as I said, I got this thing about aluminium wrong because I was just behind the times, and I had so much other work and people wasting my time that I overlooked graphene, and graphene nanoparticles are the nano aluminium that I was looking for. So it is possible that my theory was actually correct, but the aluminium is actually graphene. Because
well there's this video. There's this video on not Max Eigen's latest one, but the second last podcast that he made on his BitChute channel, and he's got this. I think he's a French scientist or someone, and he's explained this whole graphene thing, and they've literally done all this solid testing on it, and he basically came out with the results. And I put all the key points on a Facebook post.
Okay.
I think I even tagged you in it.
Yeah, I think I remember. I wasn't really paying attention.
Yeah, because
I'll tell you one other thing which I think is very significant, which is another thing that only I've worked out so far. And that's the following. At the beginning of 2020 and also at the end of 2019, the publicity for 5G in every single country in the world was all around 60 gigahertz. Then some people online, just before this COVID bollocks kicked off, started talking about how 60 gigahertz is the absorption spectrum frequency band of diatomic oxygen. And thus, nobody really pointed it out specifically, but because oxygen becomes a dipole under EMF influence, it then oscillates, and that means it can't bind with hemoglobin because biology is a DC phenomenon. In fact, some of the first commentators who were silenced in the 20th century even questioned 60 hertz, the mains electricity that we have in our houses, as being damaging to our system because biology is a DC, a straight field.
Well, that's because they put a lily wave on the 50, 60 hertz electrical connection.
Well, I mean, it's inherent. It's inherent because 60 hertz means it's cycling between positive and negative, i.e., it is AC or alternating current. And the point that these 20th century scientists who were silenced made was that 60 Hertz alternating fields are antagonistic to biological fields because biology is an inherently DC phenomenon. Does that make sense? Biology is a field which has only one polarity, which doesn't alternate.
Well, hence how we get the term dirty electricity. Yeah.
No, dirty electricity is a different concept.
In the sense, if 60 hertz is basically working against biological life, and they've got a Lilly wave attached to it, well, it kind of makes sense in that sense.
Well, what dirty electricity means technically is through incomplete, badly made transformers and badly made transmission line equipment. It means that a very great magnitude and quantity of harmonics are produced at very high frequencies, and so that's high frequencies is where we get back to the concept of microwaves and how microwaves are damaging for us. I mean,
this is the thing. They could be using electricity the same as the microwave system in a cold energy sense instead of the hot energy sense that's harming.
Possibly. I mean, if 60 hertz is damaging, then 60 billion hertz is, going to be a billion times worse. But yeah, I mean, to get back to the point is that 60 gigahertz is the frequency, which is the absorption band of oxygen. But that means once you translate into oxygen being a dipole, it means that it oscillates oxygen. So oxygen couples to the field because it's the same wavelength in angstroms as the signal, and so that means that oxygen then follows the alternations of the field. So it's going to be at the same speed as the field is alternating. And what I noticed is that after people, not so completely as I've just explained it, but partially explained things about this online and on videos on YouTube at the beginning of 2020, then something very interesting happened. All the countries in the world simultaneously changed their publicity for 5G. And what they changed it from was from 60 gigahertz. And what they changed it to was from a number of was to a number of frequencies, some of which were extremely low. So I mean, like, how could that even be the same technology? Because they were like in the megahertz spectrum and stuff like that. So it made no sense. And the highest one, Stephen, that they published after that time was 39. And that's very significant because 39 is the highest frequency, which is not in the V band. And so you've got to ask yourself, why did they label it the V band in the 1940s when they were classifying all of these different microwave bands? Into the V band is, I think, 40 to 70 gigahertz, right? So 60 is within that. Why did they call it the V band? I mean, and I checked the bands, and they weren't sequential. I mean, it wasn't like VWXYZ. It was V on its own without any order in terms of the other.
Well, V seems to stand for vector.
Well, V stands for virus, is the point, Steve.
Oh, I see. And also, it's interesting because 39 hertz is generally where human auditory hearing sort of starts to stop.
No, it's 39 gigahertz.
Oh, you're talking gigahertz.
Yeah, no, this is far above the audible range.
Oh, yeah. I'm talking about below. Sorry, I thought you were talking about 60 hertz and then down to 39 hertz.
No, 60 gigahertz. That was all of the publicity for every country in the world for 5G was that it was all between, I think, something like 59 and 64 gigahertz, which is billion cycles a second. But then after people started pointing out that this was disrupted to oxygen because it was in the absorption spectrum frequency band of diatomic oxygen, then what happened is that they changed all the publicity, and after that time, the highest publicized frequency was 39, and that is the highest frequency that exists without being in the V band, because the V for virus band begins at 40 gigahertz and then it runs through 50, 60, and 70 gigahertz. So it includes 60 gigahertz, and I think that that is very suspect, because I think that after people started talking about this, I think they panicked. I think they panicked and they realized that they could get rumbled. So what they sought to point away from any kind of evidence that this might be part of their modus operandi in terms of the larger COVID or convid, as it really is, psyop. Yeah. So that's what I believe. That's why they changed the frequency, so that the highest remaining one that was in the publicity was 39, because they didn't want to point, because they probably knew what V for V band stood for, which was virus simulation. Mm-hmm. So I believe that they were pointing away from V for virus, because they knew why that band had originally been named the V band, and and V obviously being for virus or virus simulation.
Well, it seems from what you've told me that they can basically manipulate the oxygen molecule once they got this aluminium and graphene in your body to separate it from the hemoglobin, like you would sort of in a microwave sense.
Yeah, because if the oxygen is oscillating, it can't bind to the hemoglobin. It needs to be still and polar to. It needs to be.
And how they do that is by they can't do that straight through the microwave stuff alone. But if they've got nano in you that's basically aluminium or graphene sort of based or something like that, then they can. Is this the bottom line here?
I believe so.
Yes, this is what I'm picking up from all your information and just putting it into the most simple lay sort of terms.
Yeah, that's what I think we're looking at here. It's obviously a bit of a jump, but that's the honest conclusion that I've come up with.
I think this makes sense, because I remember Brendan O'Connell saying, well, it's not going to basically alter the oxygen molecule per se with microwaves in our body by itself, but with this extra sort of knowledge of the superconductivity of the graphene and the aluminium and stuff like that.
It's just ordinary conductivity.
Yeah. This is how it's achieved, and this is what makes sense.
But Brendan O'Connell didn't say that. Brendan O'Connell was against people saying that.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because he was basically saying that just basically charging the oxygen molecule through the microwave is not going to basically disaffect the oxygen molecule. And I think he's correct in that sense, but it does when you've got these extra nano added ingredients. This is what I'm picking up from all your information that you've just allayed.
The 60 gigahertz signal can't even. Yeah. Well, his point was that 60 gigahertz signals of 5G can't even penetrate a piece of paper or a leaf, which is why they had to cut down all these trees, you see.
Yeah.
So that was his argument as to why the 60 gigahertz couldn't be interfering with the breathing process, because it can't penetrate the body. But if you've got a conductor in the bloodstream, and therefore, in every cell of the body, permeating the entire body, and concentrating and forming an electric circuit in the blood vessel system,
yep,
then you can get the signal conducted into the interior of the lung.
this is what is making sense, and this is literally the whole mechanism that we really previously understood in basically connecting technology up with the whole virus thing. This is how it's working. So it's basically a con job, but a very fucking smart con job into basically manipulating an apparent virus sort of situation into our body, but doing it through technology.
Yeah, I think that's basically what's going on.
Yeah.
Because there's no other real explanation. I mean, there's no other good explanation as to why. I mean, one of the things that you may have seen is that Alex Jones has come out and said, "Oh, they've got special insider information, and this is like tranny porn, controlled opposition, military operation." You know, his apparently his whole operation is like a military intel base operation or something. And he's coming out and saying, "Oh, we've got some insider information. It was 5 viruses spliced together, and it's got a special virulent genome," and saying all this thing about basically pushing the narrative that it is a virus. You still there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're pushing the narrative that it's just a virus. And so, I mean, if that's coming out, that's more information to add to the mix, which is potentially part of the controlled opposition, because we all know that Alex Jones is obviously controlled opposition and, serving an agenda. So I think that that's another clever, timely piece of propaganda that's been put out there to reinforce the concept that it is an actual biological virus. And there may well be a biological virus in play as well, because, as I said before, this is a clusterfuck. So you've got all of these different factors going on at the same time.
Well, what I can see, James, is that the only way a virus can be possible is if it's fucking injected into you, because cell exosomes are not fucking airborne viral pathogens. End of story.
Well, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, there's a whole conversation you could have about virology itself, and there's points that you can make about various different arguments and positions within that. But I think what's really important that everybody has now lost sight of is to reinvestigate the possibility that there is a correlation between this graphene and the 60 gigahertz and the ARDS, because some of the symptomology that was coming out at the beginning of COVID, there was a doctor, what was he called, Kyle Siddell or something, in New York, and he came out with his experience of COVID, and it was very much like an oxygen depletion situation, and people have said the same things about SARS as well. So he was saying that it's like these patients have been taken to the top of Mount Everest without acclimating, or it's like they're in the cabin of an aircraft.
Yeah, deep vein thrombosis sort of condition. Yeah.
Well, no, it's more of an oxygen deprivation condition.
Well, that's seemingly how deep vein thrombosis actually occurs.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah. I'm sure they're connected there, James. If you look into that.
Okay, yeah, I'll look into it. I think the point is that the patients, there's nothing wrong with them, but for some inexplicable reason, they're not getting enough oxygen into the blood, and that is the reason why they were all dying on the ventilators. Because when they put them on the ventilator, that's only supposed to happen once the patient has deteriorated to the point that their breathing muscles, diaphragm and intercostal muscles, are too tired to breathe. And so at that point, the pressure wave from the ventilator takes over the inflation and the deflation of the lungs in terms of breathing. And so what's happening with this COVID situation is that for some reason they're not getting enough oxygen, but their breathing muscles are all completely fine. So the reason they died on the ventilators is that their muscles were still strong enough to breathe, and their diaphragms were still strong enough to breathe, so that when they put them on the ventilators, the pressure wave from the ventilation equipment caused muscular antagonism with the breathing muscles, the intercostal muscles, and the diaphragms. And that muscular antagonism caused injury to the lungs and the lung tissue and the musculoskeletal system responsible for breathing. And that's the reason why these COVID patients were dying on the ventilators, is because the ventilator was completely inappropriate.
Totally, because the ventilator is literally like a death sentence, especially when you don't have any fucking breathing problems. Yeah.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, yeah, if you don't have any breathing problems, but I mean, it's not necessarily a death sentence. The reason that it's a death sentence is because the muscles are still working. The breathing muscles are still working in these COVID patients. So there's no explanation for why they're getting oxygen deprivation. There's no reasonable explanation.
I think you've hit the nail on the head by saying that once these oxygen dipoles sort of get enacted through the graphene or aluminium sort of nano, well, then the hemoglobin does not stick, or the oxygen doesn't stick to the hemoglobin. That seems to be the bottom line here.
Yeah, that's the bottom line, is that if the oxygen is oscillating, like water in a microwave oven, the molecule is flipping. Mm-hmm. Imagine a molecule flipping at 60 billion times a second. If it's doing that, then it can't bind to the hemoglobin, because to bind to the hemoglobin, it has to be sitting still so that the covalent bonds between the hemoglobin and the diatomic oxygen can form. So if it's not sitting still, then the oxyhemoglobin molecule cannot form.
I think this is really key here, James. Thank you very much for that explanation, mate. Well, we didn't get a sort of a recording of the next bit of what was going on at the Manor, but I think we've got something really important here to sort of share with people, regardless.
Yeah, I think so. I just got this email and I looked through it, and it was saying all sorts of things about graphene and why graphene is causing problems in the body and how it could be causing COVID-like symptoms. But it didn't contain this explanation. But what I realized is that the nano graphene is the nano aluminium that I was looking for. And actually graphene is almost as electrically conductive as aluminium. It's the next one down.
Yeah,
imagine a scale. Yeah, if you imagine a scale of the elements, in descending order, you would go from silver to copper to gold to aluminium, and graphene is the next one down.
Well, isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting when we look at sort of gold, silver, and copper? Well, they're more sort of natural, organic sort of conductors that are not going to cause harm. But then they've picked.
Well, they're metallic.
They've picked the ones that are more secondary sort of ones that are the most powerful ones, because then that they can manipulate stuff through secondary processes, as we well know, right across the board. And the graphene and the aluminium being the highest of the sort of toxic sort of metal.
Yeah, they're more toxic
varieties. So this works.
It depends on the form. I mean, gold, copper, and silver can be toxic as well, if they're in the monatomic form in particular.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is why we had this conversation before about how the ancients used to ingest this soma, but it's actually made of nanoparticles, and that's the reason why in Mana B or Mana Vi, named after Mana in Ecuador, there was this Atlantean colony there on top of a river which contained nanoparticle gold and silver rather than the monoatomic form, because the nanoparticle goes into the blood, but it doesn't.
So you're basically saying these nanoparticles are bioavailable as compared to the monoatomic sort of stuff, which is rubbish. Yeah.
No, it's actually in a sense the other way around, because the nanoparticle goes into the bloodstream, but it doesn't penetrate the cells. So if you're looking to create an electric circuit in the body for energy boosting purposes, which is what this SOMA process seems to have been about, then if you've got the nanoparticles, then they stay in the bloodstream. Whereas if you take the monoatomic gold, because it's single atoms, it crosses over the cell membranes into the actual cell structure where it's cytotoxic, which just means toxic to the cell.
Yeah, it's a cytokine storm. Yeah.
No, cytotoxic.
Okay, but what I've noticed is that when you're using these sort of metals properly, you're using them in a bioatomic sort of form as opposed to a monoatomic form.
Well, more just a multi-atomic form.
Yeah, multi is even better, but at least with the bio.
It's not biological. It's not a biological. It's not a biological.
Oh, when I'm talking bio, I'm meaning at least it's not the mono form. It's actually got the balance. You know, it's got the masculine, feminine balance in it.
Well, it just means that it's like a piece of small metal rather than the separated atoms.
Yeah.
It's like a small piece of metal. So a small piece of metal, nanoparticle scale, contains very many atoms. Well, I mean, you could call it a crystal. You could call it a metallic crystal.
Yeah, so you're looking at the whole form rather than the separated mono, atomic form.
Yeah, because if it's a small piece of metal, then it can't fit through the cell membranes between the phospholipid.
So no wonder the monoatomic gold and all of those processes really fuck up the genetics of the elites, because what it does in the effect, it gives them an ascended consciousness before their consciousness is ready to handle that level of information. Okay, so
well, I mean, it's just poisoning yourself at the end of the day.
Yes, and it makes them very dangerous, because there's no shortcuts to consciousness and real enlightenment, right? That's something that we all can only do for ourselves. And when they used to be junkies on this monatomic gold from well beyond Egyptian times and stuff. Right. And what it does in the rituals, it gives them a temporary ascended sort of consciousness before their consciousness is actually ready to operate at that enlightened level, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, sure.
So it makes it the person who's taking the monatomic gold very fucking dangerous with regards to the powers of their manifestation, because they're completely unbalanced, because they're not ready for that level of information.
Yeah.
Because with consciousness and knowledge comes responsibility and responsibility of that knowledge. And if you don't have pure intention with that knowledge, not only are you going to fuck things up on a grander scale with the powers of your unbalanced manifestation in that sort of ascended sort of consciousness sort of state that's brought on artificially through the monatomic sort of substances, you're going to screw up your genetics even further.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're just poisoning their genetics.
That's right.
Poisoning
and this makes them even more sort of mentally ill and unstable and psychopathic and soulless and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, in terms of responsibility, if you're becoming part of the universe, then naturally you would take care of yourself in terms of taking care of the wider world and the wider population of people, and they're doing exactly the opposite. So I mean,
that's exactly it. That's the responsibility that comes with this knowledge, and it's like, if you don't have your shit together, you become a very dangerous sort of instrument in those states.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've been there. So tell me more about the manor. What exactly happened after this thing came out of the statue?
Okay, then. So where we got up to was, I told you about, okay, just to recap, I'd basically been drugged up for this particular ritual, and I was either on LSD or some other forms of sort of psychotropic sort of substances and things like that the professor would have been privy to, that would have basically conduced my consciousness state to be exactly in the right place that they needed for me to basically extract this Draco Governor General, known as the Christian, or simply known as the Christian Devil, out of this old statue prison that it had actually been in. And so I described how basically the professor badgered me and goaded me to focus on the eyes of the actual statue, and eventually I did, even though I was reluctant to do so. And once I locked in on the eyes of this statue, the eyes of the statue literally lit up, and then basically out of a duct in the face below one of the eyes on the statue, a smoke started coming out of the statue like a genie coming out of the bottle, and then it basically formed into this big sort of haze above the ground, and then out of nowhere this smoke manifested into the being known as the Christian Devil, or the Draco Governor General of this earth terrain, in their sort of tiered hierarchy, sort of, you know, how they look at it.
You described this as being a sort of hybrid between a human and some kind of reptoid.
That's correct, in the sense of, okay, when it manifested, it went thump on the ground with its feet, its hooves. Okay, it looked straight at me, and then it literally went 180 degrees in the other direction and scampered out of the room so quickly, as fast as a cheetah. 30 seconds later, there was a big ghastly scream from the maid in the kitchen. And from, even though it was out of my view, a remote viewer has told me that that poor woman ended up as lunch. Okay. And then I basically got up from the actual rug, that brown and red rug that I was on in the actual Egyptian Rite temple in the manor, and I started getting up and yelling at everyone and pointing at the statue. Did you see that? Did you see that? Did you see what happened? And then the professor pensively, he sort of got anxious, and he, instead of running out to sort of check on the maid, the first thing he did was basically go to the statue, and then very cumbersomely he tried to move the statue out of the temple. So this seemed to be some sort of reactive sort of reaction from him.
Do you think there's any chance that this was some kind of illusion in terms of some sort of stage magic type setup where they produced a lot of smoke from the statue, and then utilizing some sort of stage magician type procedure, they introduced this hybrid anthropoid being, and then somehow removed the smoke to make it look as if he had magically appeared.
I've looked at this possibility that, you know, they could have used the statue as a sort of a proxy to, you know, for this thing to actually come through. Okay. But on deeper investigation, I strongly feel that it was actually locked in this statue as a prison, and I'll give you reasons why. Okay. Because basically at this actual ritual, Rosemary Norton was present. Okay. And the thing is, getting into your question about the type of being it was, Now, this particular, I call it the fake cat, okay? That's my slang nickname for it, because it is. Because, yes, it does have, with this reptoid, it has a combination of genetics. People call them reptilians, but it's not the actual accurate sort of term for it. They're reptoids in the sense that, yes, they do have reptilian genetics in them, but they also have a combination of other animal genetics and even human genetics as well for the actual humanoid form. Okay, so there's a combination of a lot of things here, and also a lot of industrial sort of products in their genetics as well. Okay, and basically speaking, Rosemary Norton was present with her cat, okay? And the cat is what gave me the big clue. Why the cat? Why the cat? Always the cat. Well, the cat was needed to basically bring out the cat essence that's in the genetics of the actual, the Draco Governor General. You follow?
I see.
So what actually had to happen with this ritual was they had to get the people involved that were involved in locking up this being in this statue, and then they had to basically get all of the genetic components for this Draco to come out of the statue to literally bring out all of the components of this actual being, so to speak, if you get what I'm saying. So basically, I brought out most of the components of this being, but they still needed other people to basically, now, number one, they needed Rosemary Norton as a host, okay, for the Draco to walk into. Hence what all of her artwork and Kabbalah witchery in the 70s and paintings were all about. She was literally walked in by this actual Draco Governor General. And it's interesting when you look at the history of Rosemary Norton. Now, she died in the late 70s, having supposedly been pushed off a tram by an invisible force. Now, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, very.
Yeah. So basically, Rosemary Norton was used as an organic host for this Draco entity to walk into. And then once basically this Draco entity had finished with Rosemary Norton, well, she ended up as roadkill, didn't she? Which is so typical of this death cult sort of culture. Once basically these Dracos basically fully use an organic host, and it's like they're ready to move on and use another one.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. So I've looked at those possibilities of them using the statue as a sort of a portal proxy as well. And I dare say that that is possible. But in this case, they had to bring this statue up to the Arcana Arcanorum rituals to further get out other aspects of the actual Draco Governor General. And they had to use all these belly dancers from all these different cultures around the world to undo all these chakra locks and stuff like that too.
I see. So was the statue a portal for several different beings, or do you see them as all being aspects of the same being?
Yes, because when you look at the actual Draco Governor General, it can shapeshift into any form that it wants. So it obviously got a lot of access to a lot of sort of soul totems of the Draco variety in that sense, okay? And right. The thing is what's very significant is that when it came out of the statue, it came out in its original form, non-shape-shifted form, if you get what I'm saying, because it literally can hide behind any image. And as you know, with these Dracos, they're all about hiding behind veils, hiding behind layers. And so, yep. As Franco Collins rightfully says, if you call something out for what it truly is, you take away its power, okay? You take away its veil, okay? Yeah. And he's absolutely right about this, and I've been doing this the whole way along. And as soon as you basically call out something for what it truly is, you take away the illusion magic from it. You take away that cover. And the original meaning of cover being under illusion and or drugged, okay? And the modern meaning of cover is the whole cover cube thing in Kabbalah, and people don't realise that the whole of Kabbalah is a fiction sort of sorcery, okay? And that it's based on illusion and basically getting the original sort of language and satanically inverting it into all these false, perverse meanings using all of our original symbol archetypes. So when you basically call out the original symbol archetype meanings, that also dispels all their distorted sort of meanings as well. This is where consciousness, everything is decided on a consciousness level, ultimately. Yeah. So once you take all the veils off, that's it. That's the end of their magic.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it with English. You know, some of the things that you find yourself saying. I mean, particularly when you're backed into a corner, you know, in some kind of legal or situational trap. Some of the meanings of the things that you'll say will actually come out as meaning to bind you more into the situation. I don't know if I'm explaining that really correctly, but
well, that only happens if you don't have the original meanings of the real meanings of words, which all comes back, as we both know, to the modular language, because the modular language is the actual language of source consciousness itself, whether you're looking at it instinctively all the way up to spoken. It is the original language of omniversal nature itself. Like the language itself seems to be even older than what we can basically trace sort of genetic race to.
Yeah.
And so when you have these original meanings that come before the distorted satanic sort of Draco sort of meanings that are all inverted, well, it's like with the voice to skull technology. They basically, they pimp my instincts and then sort of mimic and mirror and twist it all back to me. So when they do that to me, I say, well, thank you very much, because with everything that you say, the opposite is true. So keep bringing your insecurity to the table and revealing yourself, because I'll just cut through it every time. Because this is the whole thing about reverse polarized duality. You know, you can literally ram it back at them using reverse child psychology. It's that simple.
Yeah, sure. So this Egyptian temple where you were with this professor.
Yes.
This was the first time that you'd ever seen a Draco reptilian, a reptoid.
Yes, this is my earliest memory. Yes.
After that, you didn't ever go back into this Egyptian temple place?
No, I did go back into this Egyptian temple place.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, this is just my earliest memory. Yeah.
So where was the Arcanorum ritual in the same place or a different place?
Both. It started at the manor, and then it ended up at the Port Macquarie rituals. Okay, so it was a continuation of what they started at the manor. And from what my Melbourne contact basically reckoned, from his remote viewing of the whole incidents, so to speak, at the manor and Port Macquarie and other ritual that are connected to this as well, okay, is that he reckoned that they fucked up and they should have done the ritual at Port Macquarie first and what they did at the manor second. And so they kind of fucked up in the wrong order. Because despite all their meticulous planning and research and study that they do to make sure that these things go off the way that they want them to, they always still fuck up.
Yeah.
They make mistakes.
It goes for everything that they do, I think. When I look at the wider topic of summoning demons, it's usually done, especially with higher orders of demons, like governor generals, or however you'd want to put it.
Yeah.
It's normally done with the offering of a human sacrifice.
Correct.
Do you think that this was an element of what happened? And do you think that you were possibly the symbolic human sacrifice yourself? Or how do you see that element playing out as part of this process?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, I was the central main attraction delicacy of these rituals, okay?
Right,
in the sense
that's
of
what I was thinking.
They wanted to really humiliate me. However, if they wanted to kill me at these rituals, they would have done it, okay? But because I am central to the conquered bloodlines, okay, that they hate so much, to them, it's like how we look at it now. If we were to catch them, killing them would be letting them off the hook, okay? It'd be a far bigger punishment to lock them up and make them face every single thing that they have actually done and been through. That would be a worse torture for them than being killed, okay? So they look at it the other way on the conquered bloodlines, where they think, okay, we can kill him as a child, but really what's going to actually serve us better is if we can actually humiliate and torture him for life with him out having memory of what we've done to him as a child, so that he bumbles through life like a dysfunctional fucking idiot, and we can literally sadistically, you know, make more of it, literally harvest more of the loose energy from this person and do more traumatic damage and put more curses on the bloodline itself by making sure he lives a life of fucking hell that he doesn't know why it's happening, because we're controlling it from the shadows.
Yeah, so it sounds a bit like my life as well.
Yes. And so in hindsight, they did ritualize, they did kill other children.
Yeah, but if you're a more valuable bloodline child, or a more valuable soul, then they actually want to keep you alive to torture and destroy and degrade that soul and to vampire it.
Well, that's exactly right. I'll give you one example of that. In the first rituals in 1975, okay, in the summer of
this is three years later.
Yes. So you can just imagine the amount of work they did with me in that 3 years up until then as well at the manor. Okay. So in 1975, in the first ritual, they basically fucked it up in the sense of they actually rendered me useless in the ritual. They fucked me up too badly to the point that they couldn't continue the ritual because I was literally unconscious.
I see.
They almost killed me, basically.
Exactly?
From what I know, basically Mengele was present and he was doing fucking shit to my brain, and he did a lot of fucked up shit. And basically then when I was rendered useless, there were a lot of lower sort of secret society types that sort of got really sort of blood hungry and frustrated. And the senior secret society types had to stop these types from wanting to basically milk the adrenochrome from the back of my neck.
I see.
They actually
sort of thought it was all over, and so they may as well kill you.
Exactly. Where the senior one stepped in and went, no. You know, it's like we've gone too far past the point, so we've got to go into damage control here. And if you do that sort of thing, it's just going to ruin everything up for the long plans. Yeah. So this is how smart the top ones are, but there's always ones amongst the ranks that this is the thing. Once they get into that sort of reptoid blood frenzy that involves the cannibalism and all that sort of stuff, some of them just actually cannot control themselves, and this is where they fuck up all the time.
Just like a bunch of sharks.
Yeah, yes, that's correct. It's just like a feeding frenzy. Yes.
Okay.
So that's what happened during the first 75 ritual that rendered it pretty useless, and a lot of them got all frustrated and all that, and hence they tend to do stupid things. But the more senior ones that were much more sort of in control of themselves and sort of more akin to their whole sort of big picture agenda, they had to keep the more unstable ones under check. And in 1976, they got much more achieved, but they still didn't complete all the objectives in the ritual in 76 right. When it came to that. So then they had to redo the actual ritual again.
How old were you in 1976?
I was 7.5 during that ritual.
Right.
Yep. And then they had to do the ritual again that ended up being in the old Parliament House in Canberra. And apparently this ritual was more successful. And they had to bring in the heavies like Mengele and Skorzeny and the top geneticists and stuff like that to make sure that it didn't fuck up. Okay. Even though it was like a who's who in the zoo in 75 and 76, there was some people that were not present, okay? Then on the third ritual, that I can't even describe how it properly happened, because there seems to be some sort of time discrepancy and time travel sort of things involved with all of these rituals as well, that I won't go into here because that will just get too confusing for now, and we can go into that at another time. But basically, they used the old Parliament House building in Canberra, and they made such a fucking mess of it, and it left so many sort of etheric sort of problems in the actual building itself that they literally had to relocate to the new Parliament House in building from that time. And that's the main reason why they actually had to do it. And this is going to sound outrageous to most people, but it does make sense when you understand the deep science of how their ritual occult science actually works, you know, as pertain to what, you know, their directives are with their agenda, you know, and how this all works. Yeah. And how this deep occult science is, well, this is the whole thing with the Inquisition. They basically stole all of the magi sciences, you know, and knowledge of nature, along with all of the indigenous tribes in the world that are related to the Magi tribes, and basically outlawed it all, so they can basically invert it all and use it all themselves under the cover of secret societies. And where on the mainstay of society, they say, well, all this magic is evil and it's not to be used, it's not part of reality, and if you're into this sort of stuff, well, then you're a psychiatric case and blah, 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 and yeah, we know the rest. Yeah, so sure. This is the cover and the front that they use to basically keep this very deep sorcery science under wraps, under cover, and hence why for these 1% rituals that do involve these Dracos, okay, and also sex rituals where the Dracos are also involved as well, okay, and also the fact that there are ritual sacrifices involved too. Well, the 1% make sure that 98% of all participants, whether they're the victims or their own Illuminati bloodlines involved in the rituals, so no one can basically leak a word about it, and it all becomes unconscious ritual programming in their lives that affects them for the rest of their lives in a fateful sort of way unless on a healing level, they become conscious of this unconscious and they do centered regression and things like that to basically get the memories back so they can see what happened, to take the emotional charge out of it, so that this occult ritual programming that's done on an unconscious level because of the memory wiping can't occur any further. It's deep stuff, James.
It sounds very deep, yeah. So are you able to recall how many rituals you were in as an overview?
To be honest, I can't. It's like I do have memories of some rituals. Other rituals I've been told about by my Montauk programmer friend, and also the colleague I had in Melbourne who also remote viewed other ritual situations.
You're talking about this Swerdlow man?
No.
No, someone else.
No, I'm not talking about him at all. I am talking about a Montauk programmer friend of mine that I'm going to keep nameless for the sake of just our talking here and now, but you know who he is already.
Sure.
And he still constantly sends me links to basically trigger memories in me. And he's sent me so many links since I've known him since 2013, a little bit before actually. He sent me so many links to so many situations I've been supposedly involved with, and only some of them I've managed to regress some information from myself, and other things he's basically thrown at me, I literally still have no memory of whatsoever. I can't be more honest because there's so much to regress. And it's like, as my Melbourne contact said to me one time, he said, Stephen, when you work out half of what they've done to you, you're going to be so beyond pissed off angry. I'm just warning you. And he was right, because I have worked out probably about a third to a half of what they've done to me. And just on that alone is so much. It is just fucking ridiculous. So what else I've been involved in? Well, it's still a work in progress, isn't it? Because there are ways to find out these things. You can get teams of remote viewers to basically go and check this all out, okay? And you independently line up the ducks there. That's a scientific process in itself. There are other intuitive ways of finding out these things as well. And there's also just sheer detective work as well, you know, lining stuff up as well. What connects the metaphysical with the physical happenings, because at the end of the day, it's the metaphysical that controls the physical. So, and unfortunately with paradigm science, as we've been given, they like to basically ignore the quantum sort of metaphysical level as it having anything to do with anything really. And it's all sort of like a 3D sort of reality, which is, it's okay to a certain point, but it's incomplete when it comes to sort of linking properly the whole metaphysical with the actual physical happenings, so to speak. And unfortunately, we've been given all the wrong information as to work out how the real metaphysical happenings actually work. So yeah, I couldn't be more honest in what I've got to say here. And it's a consistent work, consistent work in progress. And my hardest sort of thing is when you're doing centered regression, it always helps to have another centered regression person with you to go through it with you that can basically guide you for when you get stuck, okay? That can basically get inside your journey. And it's something very easy two people can do when they're centered. But you need to have someone that has the ability to be able to do this. And to be honest, I haven't found many people that actually have the adequate skills to be able to do this properly. Where I can do it for other people, no problem. But when it comes to doing it for me, I usually have to educate the person on how to do it properly, the centered regression process. People who have got already advanced standing in sort of intuitive and psychic sort of processes pick up on this stuff very, very quickly, okay? Because I tailor it to how they know themselves, okay, as into what information they need. But people who haven't done it before, well, they've got to go through all the rudiments and they're not really in a position to be able to sort of help the process. So
one of the things that we worked out in Peru in 2009 was that the real core of the Toltec tradition is the recapitulation. That's the sort of core element, and that's what allows you to enter these states or doorways in your own energetic development, where you're able to, well, the Toltecs say, you know, turn around and face the energy of the future coming towards you, rather than going through life looking at the past, and all these various processes. And I actually remember prior to my experiences when I was 18, I actually remember going through certain memory processes of integrating my memory, where I was able to finally reach a state where I could recapitulate my whole life, and then that appears to be the doorway into turning around, as the Toltecs say, and looking into the future, and that's where you're able to access the energy of the future and the future present, and all of this mystical stuff then becomes, like a bit of an open book, and you can understand it all.
Well, that's the thing. Once you basically center, okay, yourself, in your solar plexus, your gut, that whole sort of area, navel, then you basically open your eye, okay, the fish eye, so to speak, not the third eye, but the fish eye at your crown. And then in between your temples, you literally merge all your soul totems as one in the kingdom there, okay? So that's basically, I'm literally putting what you just said into a very simple sort of format so people can understand, or comprehend rather, what you're actually doing in order to access the past, the present and the future. Because once you basically access the fisheye, well, there's also a Stargate ring there on your crown that enables you to time travel through the past, the present and the future there, okay? Because the past, the present and the future is all a simultaneous experience, simply known as the present now. And all information is contained in the present now, and how we access the present now is by being centered. Now, some people are just naturally centered more than other people, okay? And what we call naturals, naturally talented people. But the more you consciously comprehend this, the more powerful it becomes, and you don't just fluke it, so to speak. You actually have a technique that can engage you into this space, bang, when you need to, okay? And this is basically how they do that, in that process of what you're talking about in sort of approaching the future present, like as you were saying. And as we know, the Toltecs, well, they were Mudgers. So they had...
I mean, I guess there's different pathways to approach it, but I mean, one of the main pathways seems to be the reintegration of the memory. I mean, when I was some of the Taoists were talking about this as well. When I was young, I used to remember, at the end of every day, I would recapitulate, or as you say, regress the whole day, and then it becomes a habit, and you're always reintegrating your memory. And actually, one of the things that I found out about Gautam Buddha is that he said that the first divine virtue, or the first virtue of the gods, is divine is probably a confused terms word, but divided. The first virtue of the gods is memory, which I think is probably very accurate, because we're so hung up on morality and the way that we think of virtues, and so we've probably lost sight of the most important virtue of all, which is your memory and your recapitulation and regression of your own past, so that when you can completely integrate it, then you can enter a state where you don't have any unresolved mental loops about the past, and you're able to fully face the future present and fully engage with what's happening now, rather than what you've been through in the past, which is remaining unresolved in an unrecapitulated or unregressed mind.
Well, that's right, because we have to heal traumas from past lives sometimes, and that's what you pick up through regression journeys, you know, because you can regress, say, for instance, you can regress to early childhood where you've got a whole heap of unconscious memories from there, or destroyed experiences that have become unconscious, and you can't remember that initial seed experience that was a destroyed experience. And through that centered regression, you basically access it and you have a big aha moment and you go, oh, I see what happened. Right. That's what happened. Yeah. And then that's what simply takes the emotional charge out of that particular samskara, that particular psychological imprint that ended up being a destroyed experience, that then gets triggered in your unconscious with here and now sort of dynamics and semantics that trigger that same sort of destroyed experience. But when you have taken that emotional charge out of that initial sort of seed experience, well, then here and now triggers no longer sort of basically trigger that dysfunctional behavior from that first initial seed experience. And this is also because I've actually taken the emotional charge out of so much of a lot of my traumas. I think a lot of these triggers that this Montauk program sends me of certain incidents, I'm having trouble remembering certain stuff is because I've actually taken the emotional charge out of a lot of it anyway. And
yeah, so it no longer bothers you.
Yeah, exactly. It no longer. I keep on telling him this all means shit to me now, man, because it's like nothing. I actually look for triggers and chase down triggers, but nothing really seems to trigger me anymore, full stop, because I've just done so much conscious work on this aspect alone to make sure that I'm, as a Scientologist would say in their language, I'm an operating clear, you know. You know, but, you know, I'm not a Scientologist or anything like that, but I'm just using an analogy because the key is, the biggest key is for all of this magic to work properly and to manifest it properly with our organic technology in our body, we have to eliminate all forms of fear that they use on us, because it's the trauma-based mind control through fear is what stops us from actually activating and developing further our true inherent abilities that they've stolen the instructions on how to basically use and explore and map firsthand again ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm going to stop you there because it's midnight here. I'm going to take a rest and we'll continue the other day. So what are we looking forward to? We're looking forward to the part where these rituals moved over to Port Macquarie.
Port Macquarie, yes, that's right, yes.
Macquarie, okay.
So we've started to bridge some of what happened at the manor to Port Macquarie because they are connected. And just on a last point there, I will say that they not only did they use the Port Macquarie rituals to basically extract the remaining essences of the Draco Governor General, so it could be a full, complete being again, okay, in this sort of realm outside of the statue, okay. They also got other statues of Dracos that had been imprisoned, that had been hiding in all sorts of unusual places, like on the gargoyles of certain old sort of Tartarian / Victorian / Masonic, whatever, old style buildings that were in Australia that have a very dubious sort of origin, in the sense of they supposedly built these buildings in the early colonial days of Australia.
Some of them were said to be Ottoman Turkish, I believe.
Well, exactly. This is what another friend of mine, researcher, is looking to at the moment. Absolutely. And there seems to be quite a big possibility that there were actually buildings and dwellings here that the British basically literally just moved into.
Yeah.
So we're looking at that possibility at the moment. But the thing is, what is significant is on a lot of these buildings, they had a lot of these statues and gargoyles, you know, that literally all of a sudden they got rid of a lot of these buildings and they took a lot of the gargoyles and statues off these buildings to basically literally do the same thing at these Port Macquarie rituals to bring the Dracos out. And what I found out all up so far is that with all the rituals, they were only 30% successful as far as releasing all the Dracos that they wanted out of these sort of statue prisons that they were in. And I've given the example of that Erie Park in Oslo in Norway is where some of these statues are, of these same statues, because they're literally too lifelike to be carved as real statues in my sort of knowledge and opinion. And then also I was told by my Montauk programmer friend that they, just for storage sake, they stored a lot of these Draco statues inside the Berlin Wall. And then when they basically knocked down the Berlin Wall, what was that, 1989, they had to send all these neo-Nazis to basically dig all these statues out of the wall for them.
I see.
Yeah, so there's some really, messy sort of details that relates to all of this as well.
When you've spoken before about what you call a dragon race being the original reptilian anthropoid, do you think that there's any validity to my material proposing hypothetical evolutionary origin of such reptilian anthropoids from the pterosauria? Obviously, you've got the imagery of the flying dragon.
When you look at the pterosauria, what type of heads have we got in the pterosauria sort of range, in the sense of, I've described the Shem Draco varieties as having a more of a squarish sort of head, okay, in its sort of jawline structure and all, all the things that they call classic sort of beauty, as in sculpted humans and stuff like that, in the Adonis sort of Greek and Roman sense and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's all very Draco sort of based. Okay, then you have the Hathor variety that have got more of a sort of an egg, sort of cone-like sort of head shape, but doesn't. Looking at the, what do you call it, the Diamorphodon and the Pterosaurus sort of things, how do you see those similarities in those actual sort of head shapes in those beings?
Is your phone ringing?
Yes, but I'll let it go through. I'll call that person back.
Okay. I think that the pterosauria are they have a very varied morphology of the heads. Some of the heads are very long, with very long beaks.
Yes.
Such as Pteranodon, Quetzalcoatlus, pterodactyl. Whereas this short, spiky morphology is like this Dimorphodon or the Ventura, I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, I've seen, I had a vision of one of these square-headed ones, and that was one of the things that really made me get onto the Dimorphodon thing, because I saw it and I thought, oh look, it's a pterosaur. it is a pterosaur. That is the head of a pterosaur. And you may have seen how I compared the denture, the dental morphology of this.
Yes,
head.
yes, I noticed that.
Yeah, and it actually matched in terms of there being 2 longer teeth and then 6 shorter pointed teeth between the 2 long ones. Whereas, obviously, in the analogous situation of mammalian dentition, you've got the 2 long teeth of the canines, and then you've got only 4 incisors at the top of the front. But this Mexican photo had clearly 6 smaller teeth in the middle and 2 either side, and it seemed to exactly match the pictures of the Dimorphodon and the other genus that I.
See, this is very important work, because we're basically narrowing down all of these types using traditional science and also the metaphysical sort of science that we've got available in, you know, all these different sort of forms. And this is a largely unexplored territory as far as the mainstream is concerned, but it does exist.
It's completely unexplored. I mean,
yeah.
I'm the only one who's done it, and because I know, you know, after I went back to Bristol University after I'd broken my spine, and I went back and I tried to continue my degree, and I think I kept it going for just over a year. I got into the second year, and then they pounced again. But while I was there, I was able to make a number of friends a couple of friends in the paleontology department, which was an old interest of mine from the 80s.
Yeah.
And so I actually learned about bipedal pterosaurs from them. So that was how I got onto the whole topic. And then as I got older and I gathered more information about these stories, you know, that you hear about, and I've actually experienced these beings myself. But what I also realized is that I've over the course of my life, I've gathered a lot of stories, more than I thought I knew, until I took the time to reflect about these beings. And so eventually I sort of started lining them up. There was a long period of time when I didn't want to believe in them at all, because I mean most of the last 20 years I've sort of not believed in them very much, because it's a sort of ridicule topic. It's a ridiculous topic.
You're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because you've ended up having all of these experiences with human beings that are basically piggybacked by these sort of Dracos, all these different varieties. And then at the same time, there's a big active campaign going through paradigm science and medicine and everything like that, and psychiatry, that says if you talk about this sort of stuff, you're a deluded fucking idiot. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This is the big cover that basically puts a lid on their occult science from being discovered. Okay?
Yeah.
And the thing is that I know already I don't have the science terminology that you have, in the sense of knowing the biological species like you do and how you've learnt it all. But at the same time, you've sort of centre connected these things with much sort of wider interconnections in science, because you're literally following your nose and not just going by a textbook, and which is a great thing.
Yeah.
And so I can basically say, I'll say here now for the record, there are 7 main tiered traditional original Draco types, okay? And the top Dracos are the Shem Dracos, and the lower caste Dracos are the Hathor Dracos, okay? And then we have this intermediary one that's kind of like, it's like the top dog with the top Shems. It's what you call the tall greys, and they are a form of Draco. The bush bloodlines, Skorzeny bloodlines, are literally of this Draco-human hybrid sort of strain of tall greys.
Are these tall grey ones, are they also a kind of reptile?
Yeah, they are reptoid. They are Draco-reptoid, and they are literally like a hybrid between a Shem and a Hathor. Okay, and they are pretty much like, a lot of them are very much involved in the legal system, actually, in the Levite priests and all that sort of stuff regarding those bloodlines. And isn't it interesting that in Judaism, they call their Lord Creator Hashem?
Yeah.
See the Shem in that?
The most high or something.
Yeah. And so...
Well, actually, one of the things that I found out is that Shem, the word Shem, was also used in Sumeria to mean a spaceship, because it goes to the most high, right? It goes all the way up high. So Shem is an old word for high.
Okay, that's really interesting. I've basically theorized that basically Shem and Hathor were the original words for male and female that they basically hijacked and took out of the language so that they could use it exclusively for themselves, because they constantly use our knowledge and information to basically hide behind, if you get what I'm saying, because they don't want to use any of their real names or anything like that.
Okay.
Okay, this is part of how their whole deception work.
So how do you see the other four species, if you like, of Draco and reptile?
Well, okay, you've got the Shems and the Hathors and the tall greys. Okay, of the Shems, there are your standard green Shem, like you see, you know, like your standard sort of green Draco sort of type, where lots of people have seen images of that in, from everything to Star Wars to lots of cartoons to, yeah, people have even basically had experiences with these things, okay? And there are many different types of green Shems as well within that as well.
That's what my mother's husband looks like in my dreams. He's green.
Yes.
And he's like a big sort of lizard.
He's what I call the Draco green Shem variety, okay? And there are hybrids of the green Shem as well, okay? I'm talking about the base sort of 7 of the Dracos, okay? And then from there's so many hybrids, it's ridiculous, okay? And then we have the white Shems and the red Shems, and both of those types are the Dracos that have horns. You find that the green Shems don't have horns unless they're hybrided with other Shems.
Right.
Okay, and then of the Hathors, we have brown Hathors. You just need to look at a Klingon in Star Trek to know what one of them looks like. Okay.
Right.
Then you have the blue Hathors that have got a lot to do behind the Indian race. Okay. And then you've got the yellow Hathors that have got a lot to do behind the Chinese, and also they were also present in Egypt and Samaria as well. I can actually find artifacts that show people the yellow Hathor Draco types in a Draco human hybrid form. They tend to have big blue eyes, a lot of them, and they have these sort of, they almost got like emu sort of eyes. It's hard to describe in the sense of they've got these protruding sort of blue eyes, but yet their whole...
Look, we're going to have to leave it there because it's past my bedtime.
Yeah, no worries. But
we'll continue with the pork macquarie or whatever it was next time.
But I just thought I'd basically just lay for the record here what the basic 7 Draco types are, and how we're going to further basically identify these facial types and body types of the pterosaurs and dimorphodons. Is that the right term that you used?
Yeah, dimorphodon is the genus.
Yes, and we're going to basically look at how all of those types all line up with these Shems and Hathors, which I already know how they line up, but we basically need to do it in a proper and scientific way.
I mean, basically, the fossil record of the pterosauria is very limited, partly because when the pterosaurs evolved to fly, so their bones became much lighter weight and more like honeycombed hollow bone structure, so that the body of the organism would be reduced in weight to facilitate flying, and that's the reason why I think there's only something like 30 known pterosaur fossils or something like that. It's very small. So what we have to remember is that if we're dealing with the pterosauria, it's likely to be a partial. We have to view the fossil record of pterosauria as incomplete.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there, in saying that we only have limited specimens to work from, and
Yeah, I mean this square-headed one, which seemed to be the one in this Mexican photo, which doesn't have a beak.
Yes.
For me, that strongly corresponds to the two genesis that I put in the document. One of which was Dimorphodon. That's a fairly good match. Other ones, there may not be good matches. I don't really know. I can't say. I mean,
well, it's funny, James, because when I was in Thailand in 2016, I actually found on the internet I found a really rare picture of an Egyptian shem, and it was had a square head, the whole everything, and I thought, finally, I found an Egyptian example and I can show James. I remember thinking that back then. And I've still got that laptop, but I haven't been able to get into Windows since. I've actually got to get the laptop fixed because that's the only place I've got that image and a few other things that I found when I was over there. Example of an Egyptian shem. Yeah, it was a perfect example.
It's cutting out. The signal's cutting out.
Yeah, they don't like me talking about that one. But yeah, I just thought I'd tell you, if I can find that square-headed example of the Egyptian shem, it would be great. It would be a great help for you with your sort of scientific sort of identification and classification of such sort of shems and hathors, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean the problem is I don't think there's very much genuine material, photographic material out there, in terms of, you know, cut off heads in Mexico. It was a bit of a one-off, you know, and it was. I just put that photo in the document because it was the only one I could see that I could really believe in.
That you could make a solid example with, yeah.
As authentic, yeah, as a looking at it with a biologist's eye, you know, and seeing the configuration and marking colours of the skin, the colours of the teeth and gums, the correct position of the muscles and ligaments that were hanging off the bottom of the head. I mean, it looked very convincing. But yep, I haven't seen any other photos ever that have really convinced me as being authentic.
Yep, and also when you're looking at the body composition of Dracos, it's a full-on desecration of nature, because in Atlantean times they literally hybrided anything possible, you know. That's what these Dracos did. They basically would hybrid anything possible just to see what would fucking happen, you know. And
yeah, sure.
It was some really diabolical sort of genetic experiments that went down there, because they literally had the genetic technology to do it, to literally change someone cosmetically, genetically, without even doing any sort of cut surgery.
Right, okay.
That's the level.
Look forward to speaking to you next time then, about the Port Macquarie rituals and so forth.
Yep.
And I'm just going to finish by saying something's going on with my computer, and I don't know if this is like some kind of interference, but I have no access to the screen. The whole computer is shut down apart from the voice.
Oh wow!
So what I'm going to try, and after we close the conversation in about 20 seconds, I'm going to try and recover the audio, but it may end up that you're the only one who ends up with the recording of this.
If that's the case, I'll just have to basically send it through to you if it's less than 3.
So as long as you look after the recording of this, if in the worst case scenario I don't have access to the audio of this after I put down the phone in 10 seconds time, then you've got a copy, and then we can just take it from there.
Well, what I'm going to do is upload these journal recordings of ours to YouTube, so basically others can basically have a listen to what we're basically discussing. Yeah.
All right then. Thank you very much for your time. And
likewise, James.
Wishing you a good day in Sydney, Australia.
Okay, mate. You have a good rest, and we'll pick up again tomorrow.
All right, best wishes. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, likewise, James. Thank you, mate.